Before you left your garrison, you'd had a drink, maybe two. You don't remember Paris, hon, but it remembers you. It's true we flew to Paris, dear, aboard an army jet. The night you can't remember, the night I can't forget. Hello, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up-and-coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. Well, I'm happy to report that I got a heavy dose of movie magic this last weekend. I know I usually do a rundown on this past weekend's hot new releases, but in all honesty, I'm absolutely chaffed to just leap into things because this Thursday I decided to take my film-addicted on the train to New York City and walk to the lovely Angelica Film Center to catch the first Thursday night preview screening of The Actor, the official feature film debut by writer-director Duke Johnson. Now, who is Duke Johnson? Some of y'all might recognize that name because this is the same Duke Johnson who actually started out as a stop-motion animator. He actually came up with Dino Stamatopoulos, whose most notable work was Moral Oral. Johnson worked as a director and junior partner in Stamatopoulos' studio Starburns Industries, for which he also directed several episodes of Stamatopoulos' follow-up series Frankenhole. But for cinematic purposes, probably Johnson's greatest claim to fame was when he served as the animation director of Charlie Kaufman's fantastic 2015 psychological drama Anomalisa. Now, Anomalisa is a movie that really went over my head when I first finally saw it in the summer of 2016, but rewatching it recently in preparation for The Actor, I'm forced to confess that I actually now think it's possibly one of the greatest films of the last 10 years, and absolutely hypnotic and suffocating tour de force that, while Kaufman's pedigree as a writer and director in its own right is certainly essential, Johnson's contributions as an animation director working in collaboration with Kaufman, I don't think can really be understated in why Anomalisa works as well as it does. Indeed, I think any discussion of Anomalisa that doesn't acknowledge the rather clear tonal influence of Johnson, and in particular working with Stamatopoulos on Moral Oral, a show that, while it was a much beloved and respected Adult Swim comedy, really progressively over the course of its run really began to push its black comedy sensibilities all the way into the terrain of some of the most melancholy and oppressive drama that one could encounter on late-night television. The very specific hypnotic and immersive experience of Anomalisa would clearly be nothing without Johnson's work as an animation director, but also, I'd argue, in pushing that film into a similar direction, where what strands of dark comedy pervades Kaufman's own writing and direction is progressively sent to new depths of desperation and loneliness that any fans of Moral Oral would be able to identify instantly as such a powerful hallmark of that show, as ironically one of the most powerful works of prestige television committed, without that work being included in much of the conversation about so-called prestige television. With that in mind, Johnson now makes the very dramatic leap to making his own live-action psychological drama, this one adapted by himself and co-writer Stephen Cooney from the posthumously published novel Memory by Donald E. Westlake. Taking place in the 1950s, The Actor stars Andre Holland as the eponymous Paul Cole, who, while on a Midwestern tour with an acting troupe, goes to bed with a married woman and is violently assaulted by that woman's husband. Cole wakes up in the hospital with both amnesia as well as severe short-term memory loss. Every day he wakes up and does not remember the events of the day before, and encountering very little sympathy from the town sheriff, he's put on a bus to the nearest town that the the little money he has on him will take him to. Cole ends up taking a job in a tannery to support himself, and with only his name and New York City address, works to save money to find out his true identity, but not before basically being sidetracked for several months by his new life in this town, where he also happens to meet an enchanting, lonely woman named Edna, played by Gemma Chan, with whom he starts a relationship, all the while apparently being able to successfully hide his condition, which again basically sets him at square one every single day. Which would already set us up for the potential of a very interesting independent drama, with one foot in the terrain of Memento and the other, ironically, more in the territory of 50 First Dates, but that itself really only serves as the first act of Johnson and Cooney's adaptation, and eventually, even after being sidetracked by his new life for some months, Cole is emboldened finally to break things off with Edna and return to New York and try to reclaim his lost identity, at the very least in the vain hope that his condition will improve. Effectively, the actor is a quasi-noir mystery, with Cole as a de facto detective trying to find the missing Paul Cole, only for much of the tension of the story to swirl around the lingering tension of whether or not this Cole we are following, this new individual adrift in an eternal dream, untethered to a consistent sense of reality or self, might ever find his way back to the rather beautiful life he had unwittingly found, with the real Cole, so to speak, gone missing. And I basically had the ideal experience when watching the actor, in the sense that for much of it, I did not like it. There were certainly aspects of it I appreciated, especially Johnson's unique approach to designing the period elements of this low-budget production, opting for a sense of magical artifice that plays into the sense of both Holland's character being lost in a kind of eternal dream, as well as, of course, an almost playhouse aesthetic where, in much of the film, the lost Cole might as well be an unaware actor in a heightened soundstage, right down to a sense that, especially when night settles, so much of the film is conveyed in terms of Cole wandering around in a moody darkness where he only really finds where he is when the set or location is lit up as if under hot studio lights. True to his pedigree, Johnson will also sometimes employ stop-motion animation itself to portray larger, establishing features of the setting that would be too expensive to achieve, and while I almost hate to give it away, because by the time the credits roll, this really does turn out to be the most impressive magic trick of the actor, the small ensemble cast of this film, all with the exception of Holland and Chan, play several roles throughout the movie, and to put a finer point on that. And while some of these ensemble performers stand out in their various parts more than others, it really must be said, when Johnson finally pulls back the curtain at the end credits, it really is impressive the magic trick that this production pulls in terms of combining costume and makeup, and even just down to the performers themselves, in getting them to really disappear into their various parts to such an extreme extent that, for the most part, you aren't even really aware of what might otherwise be the most obvious calling card of this living cinematic play, that all of the ensemble cast are playing various parts, sometimes different parts within the same scene, and separated only by a simple cut. I would even go so far as to compare Johnson's success here to a masterpiece as glorious as Qiu Zhangzhang's phenomenal A New Old Play from 2021, but I would be remiss if I didn't admit that, at least at first, a lot of those same qualities that were so impressive about the actor were, at first, again, exactly the sort of thing that I didn't like about it. Part of it is simply that I think Johnson and Cooney's script is a little too smart for its own good, especially in terms of dialogue prose, just having that twinge that is so very familiar to more magically styled indie movies since time immemorial, of just feeling like they are trying way too hard to convey what should really be something as simple as, like, small talk between Holland and Chan's characters meeting for the first time in a bar. And that really just goes to an overall sense of cliche magical indie aesthetics, that sense of an indie production kind of overextending itself to almost ingratiate itself to the audience in a way that, especially for a film with a premise like The Actor, is not only too aware of itself, but also simply simply too eager to impress and to please, to stand out stylistically rather than to really draw the spectator into that style as its own symbolic, immersive experience where they forget the stylization. They forget the artifice and impossibility because they're keyed in so emotionally. All the while with those same budgetary limitations being given away in terms of certain aspects of Johnson's direction that are simply not very impressive, honestly. Coming from an animation background, you would expect that Johnson's staging of some scenes would be a lot more deliberate and motivated, but there are, again, several points early on in this production where even that anodyne sense of stylish indie movie magic, that self-aware playhouse aesthetic, that ensemble cast conceit, this whole dreamy vibe is undermined by our awareness of Johnson and editor Garrett Elkins seeming like they at times need to cut around the fact that they just didn't have the time to get certain scenes in the can with all the stuff they needed to make every shot and cut feel motivated and like it is saying, as much as all this aesthetic frippery makes it appear like the filmmakers want to be speaking to, not just to the film's themes, but to just an overall tone they're trying to achieve in terms of a consistent immersion in this kind of lost, dreamy logic of a character who is moving through a world without a sense of who he is. But in much the same way that Anomalisa went over my head nearly 9 years ago, only for me to rediscover what a masterpiece it was for both Kaufman and Johnson, the more I stuck with the actor, not only the more tight and motivated and deliberate and technically impressive Johnson's direction and, of course, Joe Passarelli's cinematography became, also the more I found myself really falling into that same sense of a hypnotic, suffocating melancholy and loneliness that by the end of it, all but perfectly took what would otherwise be totally abstract and cliche themes of identity and finding one's purpose in life, and made them hit home in a really deep emotional way that when I was walking away from the theater, when I was getting back on the train, I found myself getting so despondent and depressed and attributing it to so many things in my own life, my own feelings of being lost and lonely and adrift in a dreamy nighttime world without a firm sense of who I am, only to realize that I was honestly, literally sitting on the train back to New Jersey with tears welling up in my eyes, that I was still being profoundly affected by what Johnson and his production team and his cast had achieved with this movie emotionally, not just in terms of stylistic and aesthetic frippery. I almost forgot to mention Richard Reed Perry's score, phenomenal work on its own and obviously absolutely essential to what makes this film work, just as much as the visual aesthetics and the ensemble performances and the design of this film. What it all adds up to is one of the best cinematic experiences one could ask for, which is not one where you are so much immediately hooked into a movie, but where the filmmakers are brave enough to wear their hearts on their sleeves and show you so many things that you might otherwise write off as cliches or laziness or pretension, so many things that you are jaded and hardened into not liking about most indie films of this magical, show-it-in-your-face, stylish kind. But then balls you over into not just going along with it, but really making you sink deep, deep, deep down into an emotional whirlpool of sorrow and tension and desperation and hope for catharsis. This is a real creeping phenomenon of a film, and I won't give away so much of this to say whether the actor does or does not finally give you that release you're begging for, but I will give it a highly affirmative, unambiguous, highest rating I've given to a film for this year so far, a 4.5 out of 5. Absolutely essential to consider as an early Brave contender for one of the best productions of 2025. Hopefully this branches out from its very limited release right now, and as many people as possible have the opportunity to see it in its proper light on the big screen before it goes to video on demand. With that, I'm tapping out. Thank you so much for sticking through this review. Don't be a stranger to sounding off in the comments. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Otherwise, please share, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia, this is Devotional Criticism, and this was the New Movie Diary. I'm gonna catch you guys next time.